Okay, welcome everybody to our latest webinar from the Intermittent Water Supply Specialist Group. Today it's a very interesting topic. I'm very pleased to introduce Yang Villa, head of the Philippines from IL Utilities, who's going to give, he's also a member of the management committee of the Intermittent Water Supply Specialist Group. He's going to give a talk on using the utility of the future framework, the World Bank developed framework for holistic intermittent water supply solutions. And I'm using this very tool myself for a West African utility. So I'm very interested to hear about Yang's experiences. So I'll hand over to you, Yang.
Thanks a lot, Joe. I'm really excited to be sharing the experience we've had in rolling out the UOF, as we call it, UOF framework in the Philippines. It's a very unique experience, is that the Philippines is the first country in the world, basically, to attempt to roll out the UOF framework on a national scale. And I'll talk about that later. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today, whether it's afternoon, morning, or evening for you. I'm going to be talking about the utility of the future framework, process, and tools, and its relationship to understanding intermittent water supply, as well as the solutions that we can develop for addressing IWS holistically. I have two key messages for you today, and I will expound on them in the next few minutes. The first is that the UOF framework is really a comprehensive tool. It is a self-contained package of tools for assessment or diagnostics, visioning, planning, and implementation of these plans for water utilities of all sizes, of all maturity levels. The second key message is that the UOF tool indeed provides a holistic look at the IWS challenge and can point us towards interconnected solutions. What I really mean by that is that we should look at IWS more than just as a technical challenge, rather we should look at it as a systematic challenge, and the UOF tool provides us with a unique perspective on how to address IWS this way. First, just a formal definition. What do we really mean when we say utility of the future? A utility of the future, as we have defined in the World Bank framework, is a future-focused utility which provides reliable, safe, inclusive, transparent, and responsive water supply and sanitation services through best fit practices, that's very important, that allow it to operate in an efficient, resilient, and sustainable manner. Now, I know this definition sounds a little tricky in that we are trying to describe a perfect utility, and we know that there's no such thing as a perfect utility. But the purpose behind defining and characterizing the UOF this way is because we want utilities to aspire to something, to push their ambition to become a utility of the future. We're saying that being a utility of the future is a continuous commitment. It is a continuous process, and it therefore requires long-term commitment to achieving the status of becoming a utility of the future. How do we do this? How can we promote utilities to become utility of the future? We help them first expand or strengthen their essential processes. That is, the processes, systems, policies, and performance that allow the utility to face their current challenges, ensures their efficiency, ensures their continuity. Furthermore, beyond strengthening their essential processes, we help utilities develop what we call future thinking capabilities, being one step ahead, especially in a rapid-paced environment, and is given the uncertainty of, say, factors like climate change and other factors that are beyond the control of utilities. We conceptualize the UOF framework based on the UOF success pyramid. And if there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this webinar today, it is what this UOF success pyramid really tells us. As you can see at the very top of the pyramid, we emphasize service to customers. This is really the apex of what utilities are trying to do. This is the ultimate objective, and service to customers should be reliable, safe, inclusive, transparent, and responsive. Again, the definitions of what it means to become a utility of the future. Now, the service to customer is supported by 5 pillars of utility operations. That is technical, commercial operations, financial management, HR management, and organization and strategy. And what I'd like to demonstrate later in the case studies and examples is how all these 5 pillars are interconnected, and we cannot, or it is very difficult for us to address IWS simply by focusing on one of these factors or pillars. At the very bottom of the pyramid, you can see legal framework and governance, which represents the enabling environment of the utility. The enabling environment is what shapes the utility's governance, its ability to adapt to change, as well as the regulations and legal environment upon which that utility resides. And these are strong influences to how a utility performs. You notice that there is a circle surrounding the success pyramid, and we call these the 4 dimensions of the utility of the future. So the UOF dimensions are innovation, introducing novel methods; inclusion, which is improving the ability, opportunity, and dignity of disadvantaged or marginalized people to take part in society; market and customer orientation is how utilities behave or operate like a firm in a competitive market, especially knowing that utilities are by nature natural monopolies. And finally, resilience, which is the ability to anticipate, absorb, and withstand difficult conditions. Now, this is a lot to take in, I understand. And what we have done is to develop a tool, an Excel toolkit that is self-contained, which utilities can use to assess themselves against this UOF success pyramid. I summarize it into these 4 phases. The first one is we conduct a diagnostic assessment. The diagnostic assessment analyzes where the utility currently stands today and its desired level of maturity in the future. For the UOF program, we set a timeline of a time horizon of 5 years for future state. The beauty of this diagnostic assessment is that we're not only looking at the quantitative indicators, which is typical of your benchmarking and assessment tools that are currently existing. Rather, we also take a look at the qualitative indicators, what we call maturity levels or maturity characteristics of the utility. The reason being that many of the quantitative indicators that we measure the performance of utilities are lagging indicators, whereas qualitative characteristics are leading. And so to have a complete understanding of where the utility stands, we need to look at both quantitative and qualitative indicators. So in the diagnostic assessment, we take a look at their service performance, we take a look at their utility maturity, and also the enabling environment, because that influences operational success as well. The second phase of the UOF program is action planning. The action planning process results in what we call a 100-day action plan, which is the time frame that we prescribe for hitting goals quickly. And also these are action items that you can implement without as much resources or budget requirements, and which are low-hanging fruits for utilities to achieve. And we also have a 5-year action plan for the action items that take longer to accomplish. The third phase is implementation. We do support the utilities, we guide them, we coach them in implementing their 100-day action plan. And finally, the strategic visioning phase is where we co-create or co-develop with the utility a 5-year strategic vision. This is for long-term and continuous improvement. If you'd like to read or know more about the World Bank Utility of the Future framework, please follow this link, or you can search World Bank Utility of the Future over on Google. So these 4 phases are contained in one single Excel file. And I'm happy to report that over the last 2 years, we have iterated on this Excel toolkit, and the World Bank, I believe, is currently refining this based on the toolkit based on the lessons that we have learned in the past rollouts and pilots of the UOF tool. In the next few slides, I'm now going to show you sample diagnostic outputs that you can get from the UOF tool. Again, noting that this is the current version of the UOF tool, and this is undergoing significant streamlining in terms of reliability of data, cleansing, etc. So as you can see here, from the very top of the graph, we can already tell that this utility suffers from intermittent water supply. They only have 8 hours on average per day of water availability, and only 34% of their current customers have 24/7 supply. If you go down to the inclusiveness section, you can see there that they only cover 69% of the total municipal population for drinking water, and only 25% of the water samples collected pass the WHO guidelines. So this is a utility that really requires a lot of improvement, not just in terms of reliability, safety, and inclusiveness, but also in other aspects of utility operations, such as transparency. As you can see here, they do not publish their accounts or their service data, and it is not shown here, but they also are not very responsive to their customers. If we dig deeper into why this utility suffers from IWS or from low coverage and such, we can look at their maturity levels. This graph shows us a specific area of asset management, and the topics are strategic asset management plan, maintenance, and maintenance record. As you can see here, the cell highlighted in purple or blue is the current level of this utility, and the cell that is highlighted in green is the desired future level. Within 5 years, what do they want to achieve? We note that this utility does not have a documented strategic asset management plan. They have some limited routine maintenance and breakdown maintenance only. And they do keep basic records of maintenance, but they do not use that data to improve their operation and maintenance practices. And so it's not surprising for this utility to have those kinds of results in their service performance, why they have very limited continuity, why they have low coverage, and other issues such as poor safety of drinking water. However, we do encourage these utilities to look forward in 5 years' time. What do you want to achieve? And this utility pushed themselves to be ambitious, and they said, we want to achieve world-class level for asset management. We want to put together a strategic asset management plan within 5 years, and the description is here on this cell on the top right. We also want to start conducting preventive maintenance based on risk assessment. And the basis for risk assessment and preventive maintenance, of course, is historical records and understanding of your assets and facilities. And that's why they need to also upgrade their record keeping and data analysis. So this is just one example of how the UOF tool can show you why a utility is achieving such performance levels by digging deeper into their maturity characteristics. Now I want to jump over to the enabling environment assessment. The enabling environment is assessed on 5 areas. Number 1, system for setting service standards. Number 2, system for setting tariffs. Number 3, institutional setup. 4 is financing. And 5 is autonomy and accountability. The table that you're seeing here is specific to the system for setting service standards, which is the basis for regulation, right? You do need to set minimum standards or targets for utilities and benchmark them or assess them against those standards on a regular basis. For this utility, we can see that they are on a mid-level of maturity in terms of setting service standards. There is some regulatory and accountability system in place. It is somewhat transparent and responsive, and both of these can still be improved by designing a regulatory process and governance system for this utility. However, what's worrying here in this assessment is that there's only a minimum service standards being set. And what's even more worrying is that these minimum service standards are not always monitored and not monitored systematically. Also, there is no accountability in place for some of these minimum service standards. For example, we only have prescribed level of pressure or a prescribed level of service coverage or a prescribed level of NRW. But there is no mechanism for this utilities regulator to impose those service standards. And therefore, it becomes a cycle, a vicious cycle of IWS, persistent IWS, because the utility is not incentivized to perform or improve its performance. So those are some examples of how UOF supports the diagnostic assessment of utilities. I want to show you now a sample output for the action planning stage. So now we know what the utility's current status is. We're going to help them create an action plan for the next 100 days and then further on for the next 5 years through this sheet in the same Excel toolkit. It's pretty straightforward. We ask ourselves, what is the first step that we need to do so that we can go from the current state to the future desired state? The examples I show here are on the topics of meter reading, data reconciliation of the meter and billing accounts, and testing and replacement of meters. As we all know, metering is an essential part of commercial and technical operations and contributes to things like commercial NRW and customer service even. In this example, we have identified on the very right-hand side the suggested actions for this utility. We have suggested to them that they should study their read and bill options, study billing software options, but we determined that these require more time and more effort in the utility, and this cannot be done in the next 100 days. And so we suggest this to be done in the 5-year plan. What they can do in the next 100 days, however, is to start studying meter testing and calibration process and centralized procurement of other utilities. So this requires them to go out and learn from similar utilities, their peers or their neighbors, so that they can copy their standard protocols for meter testing, calibration, and centralized procurement. Because at present, they do not have these systems in place. Again, which contributes potentially to high commercial NRW. After we help the utilities develop their action plans, we then help them implement their 100-day action plan. So this is about 3.5 months of continuous monitoring, coaching, and guidance for the utilities. This example is just lifted from the previous slide, which is studying meter testing and calibration process. And this utility has completed this action item within 12 weeks, which is the prescribed 90 to 100-day action plan period. And how they did this was they visited a neighboring municipality. They studied the operations, their systems, including how they conduct meter replacement and calibration, any payment schemes, how they deal with arrears and delinquencies, how to maintain flow meters and where to put production meters, for example, what billing software they use, and how to conduct ring fencing. So they made the most out of this action by basically learning as much as they can from a similar neighboring utility. So something as simple as this action can have a profound effect on utilities. What we want them to understand is that you do not need a lot of budget to start the transformation process. It can be as simple as studying, can be as simple as references, it can be as simple as training. And these all can be done within the next 100 days. But of course, the UOF also pushes utilities to look beyond the 100 days. The 100 days is just there for momentum. And once we get the utilities to be confident about the changes and transformation they can make, then we encourage them to look at the next 5 years. In this section, we encourage them to set targets for themselves for the next 5 years in what we call a 5-year strategic vision. As you've seen earlier, this utility only has about 8 hours of water supply per day on average, and they aim for 18 hours in the next 5 years to achieve this level. They also want to double the percentage of their customers with 24/7 supply. Still not quite 100%, but they feel that a doubling of this percentage is realistic, and this is something that they can pull off in the next 5 years. Still not bad. As we all know, being water professionals ourselves, it does take time to address IWS, and hitting 100% 24/7 is not an easy feat. We do need more time. We do need more effort, than especially for utilities such as the ones that we have dealt with in this project. So to summarize this first section, what I really want to impress upon you is that the UOF framework that we have co-developed with the World Bank is a comprehensive tool for assessment, visioning, planning, and implementation for water utilities of all sizes. And I mean to show you some examples in the next few slides. Please do visit the World Bank website to learn more about the UOF. You can download the toolkit for free. You can start implementing your own diagnostic assessment. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out on how to use the UOF toolkit. Since 2020, we have implemented the UOF tool and framework across a number of countries. As you can see here, we have implemented that in the first phase of the project from 2020 to 2021. We have implemented this in a total of 10 utilities across 8 countries, including the Philippines. In phase 2, which started from middle of last year until basically just this month, we have expanded the Philippines portfolio by another 10 utilities, and bringing the total for the Philippines to 12 utilities. And as I mentioned earlier, the first country to attempt to roll out the Utility of the Future framework nationwide. Other than this, the World Bank is also implementing the UOF framework in a number of utilities in these countries. So indeed, UOF is continuing to be refined. We are also expanding the reach of the UOF framework. I want to talk to you more about the project that we did in the Philippines. As I mentioned, we first had a pilot from 2020 to 2021. And in the Philippines, we ran that Metro Manila pilot for the 2 Manila utilities. You may know them as Maynilad and Manila Water. The objective of this pilot was to test and refine the UOF process. And it was good to test it against Maynilad and Manila Water because these are large and mature utilities. And so because they're mature utilities, they were very capable of self-assessment. We were only there to guide them, especially during the 100-day action plan implementation period and visioning exercise. That Metro Manila pilot is different from the phase 2 in the Philippines, which is an attempt at national deployment. And we piloted that starting from last year, and we are ending the pilot as of this month. And hopefully our partner will be rolling out the UOF framework across more utilities in the coming months. Our partner for this national deployment is the DILG, or the Department of the Interior and Local Government. DILG is in charge of overseeing and organizing what we call local government units, or LGUs. These are your towns, municipalities, and cities around the Philippines. The main difference between the national deployment and the Metro Manila pilot is that this time around, we are now dealing with smaller utilities, way smaller than Maynilad and Manila Water. We're talking about service area population from 1,500 to maximum of 46,000 in the municipality, versus Maynilad and Manila Water that are serving about 1 million connections each. That's about upwards of 9 million service area population for Maynilad, for example. In the national deployment, we're also dealing with utilities of varying levels of maturity. And one indicator for that is their service coverage ratios. As you can see, we have a minimum of 35 all the way to 93% service coverage. And the levels of sophistication of their operation and management also differs widely in this cohort of 10 municipalities. We also quickly noted that these LGUs require more support in terms of assessment and action planning. Not all of them are capable of self-assessment, unlike our experience with Maynilad and Manila Water. They do need some guidance with the definitions for certain terms, for example, or to guide them through the interconnections between the pillars of utility operations. And we did that through a number of workshops. Finally, we also recommended to DILG, our partner, that we need to train DILG staff if they envision the UOF framework to be rolled out in more places across the country. So from middle of last year to just this month, we have achieved the following key outputs and outcomes in the national pilot in the Philippines. As I mentioned, there is a total of 10 participating LGU run water utilities for this cohort of the pilot. I ran a total of 70 individual workshops and progress call meetings with these 10 utilities over the last 6 to 8 months. And these workshops range from, covers the entire, for the 4 phases of the UOF assessment process, from assessment, action planning, implementation, and visioning workshop. We also conducted one special workshop for all of the 10 utilities because all of them were asking for help in these 2 topics. Number 1, how to create vision and mission statements. And number 2, how to get started with their water demand projections. In terms of their 100-day action plans across all 10 utilities, there are a total of 532 UOF improvement items. We also conducted for them a best practices sharing session where we invited 6 utilities to share best practice items, a total of 8 best practice items. And I'm very proud that this cohort of 10 utilities have achieved an average completion rate of 85% for their 100-day action plan. Not bad for a first cohort of 10 utilities in this pilot project. In the next few slides, I'm going to walk you through 4 key lessons from deploying the UOF framework in the Philippines and its relationship to addressing IWS holistically. The first key lesson that we learned is that we know this intuitively, but it bears repeating, that inefficiency in commercial operations and poor financial planning result in low investment capability. One thing to know about the local government units in the Philippines is that many of them require additional funding for their projects and programs, but not all of them are creditworthy or have experience in taking out loans or are confident in taking out commercial credit. And they often rely on grants from national government to get some of these projects started. However, what we envision for these utilities to break that vicious cycle is for them to improve their commercial operations and their financial planning practices so that they can increase their investment capability and therefore have the funds and capital to invest to address IWS, their IWS challenges. I'll give you an example of how we saw this inefficient commercial operations by using the tool. As you can see here on the area of collection efficiency, this utility has only limited payment methods available for their customers, which means that customers typically will not pay on time, or they will wait for a number of months before they pay. They go to the office to pay, because there are no alternatives to payment. This utility also does not have a reliable system for following up on arrears, which makes their collection efficiency suffer, and their bottom line, of course, therefore suffers as well. The good thing about this utility example is that they do have a disconnection and reconnection policy, and they carry it out on a standard basis. Some utilities that we have worked with in this rollout, unfortunately, do not carry out disconnections on a standardized basis because of things like politics and other issues where they cannot enforce the disconnection policy. In terms of financial planning, the reason why many of these utilities are unable to foresee investment requirements, for example, in addressing intermittent water supply, is because they do not have the practice of tariff analysis and financial forecasting. Therefore, they need to be trained on these aspects of financial management for them to start looking forward. What do we really need in terms of investment and capital in the next 5 years? And how can this address our issues of continuity of supply and coverage? Another important finding that we saw in our dealing with these LGUs is that many of them practice budgeting as a top-down process rather than a needs-based budgeting process. What do we mean by that? It means that the budgeting office of the municipality basically dictates the budget for waterworks for that year, irrespective of how much the waterworks system really needs. And so over time, because of this practice, your water utility operations and management just do not have the discipline of budgeting for their actual needs. And they simply rely on the budget office's allocation for the following year, which often remains stagnant or just increases by 5%, maximum of 10%. And this is not enough to address the recurring and persistent IWS challenges, especially when they require significant investment and capital. The second key lesson that we saw from the UOF Philippines program is that many of these LGU-run utilities' human resources are haphazardly organized, and therefore they do not yield efficient operations. We already see this by way of these utilities not having an HR strategy in place that basically aligns the entire workforce with objectives for utility operations. That assumes, of course, that these utilities also do not have strategic objectives or do not have multi-year business plans to guide them for the 5-year time horizon. We can dig deeper into the way that these HR managers plan ahead in terms of staffing requirements. And as you can see in this example, this utility does not have a succession plan. They conduct a bit of staffing analysis and staffing planning, but they do not, or they are unable to adhere to the prescribed number of staff required for efficient operations. So you can imagine, for example, your operators doubling as your meter readers, doubling as customer service agents, all under the same wing. And this does not lend for efficient operations. And that's why many of these utilities have persistent issues with IWS and as well as customer service challenges. We have several other findings for human resources. The first one is many local government units do not have a formally organized utility to speak of, meaning the teams involved in waterworks system operations are disjointed. So one thing to know about local government units is they have a budget office, an engineering office, a treasury, accounting office, and these are all separate departments within the municipality. The fact that there is no single entity responsible and accountable for water supply operations means that each of these departments are accountable for a piecemeal responsibility for water supply. And it's easy to say that's not really my problem. Talk to engineering, talk to budgeting, or talk to accounting. And because of this disjointed teams, no one is accountable for the totality of management and operations. The second, we also found reason for suboptimal organization is many of the operators on the ground, your operators, your meter readers, for example, they are on job order status, meaning they are not permanent positions and they are renewed on an annual basis and they can be removed out of contract as well. And because they're on job order status, there really is no incentive for them to perform their duties well. And we've seen that even if you have a strong management and supervisory level for the utility, if you do not have a strong operational pool, then it sacrifices the efficiency of the utility as a whole. The third is that similar to budgeting, trainings are not based on capacity development needs, and the HR managers of local government units are not trained to identify the skills gaps, particularly for operators. Rather, they provide training opportunities on the basis of what is available. So they would see that there is a training available for not even remotely close to what their capacity development needs are. And unfortunately, they do not have, they are not able to seek other training opportunities for their operators and managers. Finally, customer satisfaction is not measured, or even if it is measured unsystematically in most cases, it is not linked to performance review. Again, the idea of let's incentivize the way our employees behave so that they prioritize customer satisfaction, including addressing intermittent water supply issues on a more timely and efficient basis. So all of these factors contribute to what we observe as poor organizational efficiency to address IWS challenges. The third is also pretty straightforward, but it bears repeating, that it is not advisable for the LGUs to act as the operator or manager of the utility and the regulator at the same time. Ideally, there is a distinction between the Waterworks office and the regulatory office, but we don't really see that in the local government units, at least not a strict delineation. And the consequence of this is that we have a poor enabling environment, a legal framework to hold the utility management accountable for not hitting minimum standards and not hitting targets. Hopefully, with changes in Philippines laws and the creation of a Department of Water or the Water Regulatory Commission, this kind of problem will be addressed. And finally, it bears noting that IWS as a whole cannot be addressed with a firefighting mindset that is just focusing on short-term problem solving, leak here, low pressure here, low supply in this other area. Rather, what should serve as an anchor for these utilities is a long-term strategic vision. What do we really want to achieve in the next 5 years, and how are we going to achieve that? Corollary to this strategic visioning is an understanding of the risks to achieving your strategic vision. So one of the ways that we help these utilities in understanding what the future holds for them is to look at potential binding constraints and risks. As you can see in this example, and primarily the main barrier or binding constraint for many of these utilities in the cohort is lack of funding sources. They fear that without adequate investment or capital, they won't be able to address continuity issues or to expand their network or to add new water sources. They also fear public support for tariff adjustment. They hesitate to increase tariffs because they have a negative reputation, for example, amongst their constituents, that their service is poor, and therefore the willingness to pay of the public does not lend confidence to their operational performance. Other risks to strategic vision could be climate change impact, in that even if they're able to secure additional water sources to plug the intermittence of their water supply at present, they're not sure whether this spring or river source will last in the next coming decades. And so just to summarize the key lessons, as you can see here, my apologies for the cat, if you can hear him in the background. What you can see here is I've noted that many of the issues and factors contributing to intermittent water supply are commercial, financial, human resources, regulation, and organizational strategy. we should look at our technical solutions in this larger context so that we can develop interconnected solutions. And I believe that the UOF tool is powerful in that it provides us a holistic tool for understanding the complexity of the IWS challenges, and therefore we can develop more targeted solutions. In conclusion, just to end this talk, as I've mentioned earlier, if there's one thing I'd like you to take away, it is the UOF success pyramid, as I'm showing here on this slide again. And utilities must really consider all aspects of the UOF success pyramid in assessing and addressing intermittent water supply. I'd just like to mention that the World Bank Global Water Practice is nominated as Public Water Agency of the Year for the UOF program that it started in 2020. And we are hopefully awaiting for the results of the Global Water Awards in the next few months. That's my last slide, and thank you all for your attention. I'm happy to have a bit more discussion and questions from the floor. Back to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Yang. And it's very interesting. Very interested to hear your experiences. So just if anybody has any questions for Yang, please type them into the chat box. I'll start myself with a few questions for you, Yang. So I myself am using the UOF tool for the utility in the Gambia in West Africa. So I have a few questions. We're still we're doing the diagnostic phase at the moment. So I'm interested in your views and your experiences with the utilities you've dealt with. How easy is it for you to get like reliable data, reliable answers from the different utilities? Like a lot of the questions are very in-depth. How much of a challenge is that? How long does the diagnostic assessment typically take for you? And then when you do the diagnostic assessment, the UOF spreadsheet itself, I mean, it's a monster of a spreadsheet, so much information. How do you when you collate that information, how do you then communicate it back to the utilities, you know, in a sort of a concise way? Because that's sort of a challenge I'm encountering at the moment.
Great question, Joe, and one that you would only ask if you start using the tool yourself, right? I think the limitation, I wouldn't call it a weakness, but indeed the limitation of the UOF tool is that it relies on self-assessment. What we've always told these utilities is that we're not here to do an audit, because if we were, we would be going down to the field, observing your operations, looking at your documents closely, poring through your financial statements. That's not the purpose of the UOF tool. There is a certain honesty and trust basis of completing the UOF diagnostic. But we do exercise a lot of critical thinking and questioning and inquisitiveness when they give their figures. For example, it doesn't make sense for them to give a figure that says we're 24/7 supply, but other indicators say otherwise. For example, poor maintenance, poor asset management, or high NRW. If you start piecing these together, you can look at the bigger picture. Operationally, what that meant is that we've had to spend a lot of time with the utilities. And for the UOF rollout, for diagnostics alone, a minimum of 2 hours is required, can go up to 5 or several many sessions, just to dig deeper into the data gathering section. Again, the UOF tool is not designed to be an auditing process. And the utility does have an incentive to self-assess honestly and accurately, because that's the trigger for the transformation and improvement process.
Okay, yeah, good. Thanks for that. And you've moved on now from doing multiple diagnostic assessments. You've implemented 100-day action plans for most of the utilities you've dealt with now? That's
right. So for myself, I've done 12 of these, so ranging from big utilities like Manila Water to the smaller ones.
Okay. And are they now moving on to the 5-year sort of the second part, the 5-year plans now, have they started getting onto that? Yeah.
Yes, they are. And it's really exciting because once they finish the program, there's such a desire to continue being part of the UOF network. And I've kept my doors open to these what we call UOF graduates and say, sure, keep me posted about your progress with the 5-year plan. The technical assistance being received by these utilities from the World Bank, unfortunately, terminates at the end of the 5-year plan. After this workshop, they basically finished the UOF, the 4 phases of the UOF program. But we do encourage them to keep continuing the assessment process. We encourage them to do this on a yearly or twice a year basis, and to keep breaking down their 5-year goals into piecemeal 100-day action plans, the way that we've taught them throughout the program.
Okay, so the sort of current involvement from like diagnostic assessment, 100 days plan, 5-year strategic plan, it's about a year sort of consultancy support, and that is it something like that before it's you basically leave it to them. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it used to be about a year, but because we've done the first phase and we've had that experience, we managed to condense the Philippines cohort of 10 utilities to just 6 months. And the reason for that is because we are having elections next month, and the World Bank wanted to finish all of the action plans before the elections. The reason being, we want the current executive and legislative leadership of the municipality to kind of sign off or green light the 5-year action plan. If this runs over to the election period, we might run the risk of a new administration being installed and not being supportive of water being a priority for their next administration, those kinds of political issues. So we did have to condense the entire program to 6 months. It's doable, but it does take a lot of focus and time.
Yeah. Okay, no, thanks very much. That's very interesting to me. I think I'm not seeing any questions come through the chat. So yeah. Well, anybody who missed this presentation, it'll be on our YouTube page later, so you can, anyone attending who wants to refer it to anybody else, can just let them know that on the Intermittent Water Supply Specialist Group YouTube page. So I think if we've no other no questions, we could probably wrap up there. I think, Yang.
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much. I'll just, before we go, let you, we're probably, our next webinar is most likely towards the end of May. We're just waiting for confirmation. It's most likely going to be intermittent water supply experiences from South America. We're just waiting for confirmation, and then that we will publicize that once we do. So on that note, I think thanks to everyone for attending. So this webinar will be on our YouTube page, and we'll also post the links to the UOF tool. It's a very useful tool. Myself, having used it as well, I can vouch that it is very, very helpful to you, and the utility I'm working with is very much affected by intermittent water supply. So yes, I endorse what Yang has presented. I'd encourage everyone to check it out. So thanks very much, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you all. Bye.